There we go.
All right, so welcome to the second episode of Purple People Present, a series where we literally present on anything and everything interesting. If you do want to present, yes, you, please reach out to me or any of your peers, and we'd be happy to set up a session for you. In this session, Lucas is going to present a very interesting segment about embedded finance and how it is part of this paradigm shift we are seeing in the fintech sector. Lucas?
Thanks, Don. I thought this was going to be a great topic to kind of present to everyone. I know a lot of us do a lot of different things within Purple Group as a company and everything like that. And sometimes it's just kind of nice to also get that understanding of what it means in the broader aspect when it comes to fintech and finance and some of the things that are going on around there. So, because not only do I work for this company, I have a massive passion for finance and fintech and everything about the industry. So I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to also take it upon myself to give a little bit of knowledge out there when it came to some of this. So let me just quickly sort out this screen share here. So embedded finance, like Don said, thanks for the great intro as well. And I think most people would know who I am, but a little bit about me as well. I'm Lucas. I'm head of partner operations at Easy Equities and Purple Group, and based all the way in the Philippines for anyone who hasn't met me or anyone watching who wants to know a bit more about me. To build on some of the things that Don put up in his too, a little bit about the things that get me going and what I'm passionate about. Massive cycling enthusiast. I thought that would potentially be one of the topics I'd talk about, but being in my 30s and having to wear tight clothes when it comes to cycling, I decided that that was going to be a topic I would skip over because nobody wants to see pictures of me like that. Massive coffee lover. It was actually part of my application to get into Easy Equities. I had to describe a process and how to get from the inputs into the outputs, and I took brewing coffee as the process and how to describe it and what everything goes into actually brewing that perfect cup of coffee. So a little fun fact about me there. And then, like I mentioned, massive fintech fanatic, everything to do with finance and the fintech and the tech side of everything. Absolutely love it. I think I'm one of the few people that sees a new banking app and actually gets excited, or will sit there at night scrolling through different banking apps and seeing what all the new experiences are like and what's going on with all of them. And then a nice little note at the top there as well, if you're expecting some fantastic, amazing presentation on a Friday afternoon, not going to come from me. My PowerPoint skills are absolutely zero, so just thought I'd put that in there. So, to get into it, what is embedded finance? So, in its most simple form, it's essentially allowing financial transactions to happen seamlessly at a point of need. So we'll get into a little bit of like the history about like how financial transactions normally took place and what that kind of entailed over the years. But in this day and age, it's becoming something that is very common, and so much so it's something that's at the back of your mind when you go through most of the different experiences on your apps or the myriad of apps that you've got access to these days and some of the services that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. But the things behind it that are actually powering it have a very long history and a very in-depth history for that matter as well. So to get into it a bit, the starting points of it would be how you access your financial services and your financial transactions back in the day. So if we go all the way back, banking, or before even banking became a thing, everything was on a bit of a barter and a lending system where people would exchange goods for services or exchange goods for other goods. And then societies evolved, they became a bit more advanced, and then you saw things like temples and trusted individuals came along, and they were essentially became those custodians of people's wealth at the end of the day. And then, there was a whole bunch of things. People became more advanced with some tools, and they decided that we can make like coins to kind of simplify this a little bit better, and can store some value in like gold and all of that. And then that became the next part of it. And then we got to what we would kind of see as some of the earlier known versions of the banks we know today, which was probably back in the 17th and the 19th century. It was quite a significant milestone for banking, where we started getting like central banks that would essentially control the flow of money within a country and the liquidity of that currency within the different industries and the different countries, you could kind of say. And then, we got a bit more in terms of the Industrial Revolution that accelerated a lot in terms of the need of access to things like branch banking, where you would have industries spread out all across the country and at like all of your ports and everything like that. And people needed quick access to funding and to loans and everything like that, because they would need to, I don't know, ship things over to different countries and so on and so forth. But what led to what we know now as a lot of the fintech side of things, I would say only really came about in the 20th century. Some people argue about it, but they would either say it was when the first credit cards were kind of issued, which was probably around like the 1950s or so, or even the first ATMs, which was like the 1970s, where that was truly like the first part of financial technology that people got access to. Credit cards, we kind of take them for granted these days. It's just a piece of plastic that gives you access to your bank account. But back then in those times, I mean, you would still have to go into a branch to get access to your money. And I think if some of us on this call, even if we spoke to not even that many generations ago, most likely our parents in the early days, they would have to carry around a little book and like write all their transactions in. And then there was checkbooks and everything like that were still around in some countries today, like the Philippines. I mean, I had to do all of my rent for the year by writing checks, which was the most archaic thing I've ever done in my life. And also the first time I've ever written a check in my life at the age of 32. And that enabled a lot of things, and it was the start of some of the things that we know today, which the advent of the internet came along with, which we'll touch on just now. So and then we saw in like the later 20th century, we had the rise of internet banking. That gave people quick and easy access to their money. It also allowed them to start doing things like international payments and everything, but there was still something missing. It was still disjointed. You would have to go to your bank if you wanted to do something. If you wanted to go buy a new car or anything like that, you would still have to make sure that you got like your pre-approval done, and that was still done at your bank or through your bank's internet banking. If you were one of the more advanced banks, but there was nothing special about it. Like your financial life was your financial life, and the rest of your life was something you did outside of your bank. But then in the early 2000s, something came along, and I think with all of us here in Easy Equities and Purple Group, we probably hear this term being thrown around a lot, but that would be APIs. So to also build on Don's presentation that he did on prompt engineering, I thought I would incorporate a bit of that into my presentation. And I started off with ChatGPT. I was asking some questions and everything like that. And I made the first mistake, which I didn't learn anything obviously from Don's presentation, which was I didn't phrase my prompts in the right way. So when I was asking about APIs and ChatGPT, something fantastic came up, which was this. And I had to make a picture of it, which is now known as the Anteater Pancake Inspector. So from this day forward, that's what I'll know an API to be, and I'll never see pancakes in the same way. And I hope to one day actually see this in real life, to have an anteater viewing my pancakes in some way. But jokes aside, APIs were a significant accelerator when it came to what we know today in a lot of our financial services and our embedded finance. So for those of us out there who potentially don't know what an API entails, it basically does stand for Application Programming Interface, and it's a easy way for different to communicate with an application and to get a response back and to do something with that information. The easiest way to explain it is to actually use an analogy of you sitting in a restaurant and using a waiter to do an order at that restaurant. So the waiter would essentially be that API where it would take some information from you, being your order for your food or your drinks or whatever it is like that. And the waiter would take that information to the kitchen, which would be your application, and then it would do something with it. And then your waiter would come back with your food and your drinks and everything like that, put it neatly on your table, and you got the outcome that you expected. It was all predefined with a menu and everything like that. And nothing was out of the ordinary unless something happened, which if some of you are a bit more technical, would generally be a 500 response. And yeah, some of the early things on that, a lot of it came from, or the very first public API would have only been in the early 2000s, so not too long ago. I mean, it would have only been, 23 years ago. We're in the year 2023 now. And that was through Salesforce, who's still around today, still going very strong, one of the big companies out there when it comes to CRM and business processes, business processing and everything like that. And then some of the other ones after that would have been like eBay and Amazon, and they also in their own right changed a lot of what it meant to access the internet and to access other services and products and everything like that. And a lot of them are now big players in the embedded finance side as well, especially Amazon. But what that meant essentially too is that banks could now take their services that were very archaic and very closed and had very, like, you could call them tall walls around all of their services, and they could expose them in a new way, in a new manner, which meant that companies and people outside of the banks who were, I would say, had a better knack for customer experience and good UX and good experience when it came to actually doing a service or a product, could actually build new experiences around it and give them access to potentially things that they would never have access to. Because, I mean, in this day and age, to become a bank is no small order. It takes many years. There's a lot of money involved, and nobody also wants the overhead and the hassle of being a bank. I mean, there's a lot of reporting, a lot of requirements, massive amounts of people that you need just to run it. And that enabled a lot of what we have today. But the biggest factor, or the biggest component that was the biggest unlock for all of this, was access to data. And in reverse, something that banks never really had access to as well, so they couldn't build the customer experiences that they wanted to around it. So if you break it down, you can essentially put it into three different layers of data, three different levels of data, which the top level would be like the holy grail of what you would want as a, call it a product manager or an application that had a certain service in mind. So what it would start off with is you would have your first level, which would be, the merchant, you potentially know the store or something like that. So typically what you would see on like your bank statements and generally the information that a bank has access to and what they would be able to determine about you as a consumer or something like that. Like, they know you swiped your card at McDonald's last night, but they don't really know what you've ordered or where that McDonald's was potentially. Then you can get into the next level, which would give you access to things like the location, the tax ID, maybe the amount of tax that you paid or VAT or something like that on the transaction. And that you would generally see with things like utilizing like Apple Pay or something like that, where they might get a bit more access in terms of the location. They also know some of the transactions that have taken place and everything like that, or some kind of payment processing in that sense. So a lot of your merchants would kind of get, your card acquiring services would get access to that kind of level of data. But then the next level would be essentially the holy grail of it all, which is actually knowing what goods you bought, what quantity, all sorts of things around that. And that's where you can actually start building all of those experiences off of. And I'll touch on it a little bit more into the presentation when it comes to non-financial companies, but yeah, it's something that we've seen a lot of, and why you would see the prevalence of like store cards and everything like that is because they had access to that information, but they weren't necessarily a bank or a credit card provider or anything like that. So they would normally partner up with someone, but we'll touch on that just now. So as a financial company, when it comes to some of the things, it's also enabled finance companies to offer their services, like I mentioned right at the beginning, in a place of where you would actually want to do that transaction. So one of the biggest parts of embedded finance at the moment is the whole buy now, pay later scene, which is essentially giving people access to, I wouldn't even call it credit. A lot of them aren't regulated credit providers, but it's getting access to funding for larger purchases that don't necessarily require credit, and in a way to try and make the transaction as seamless and easy as possible. So there's no need for credit applications or providing 3 months of bank statements and all the typical things that you normally require. And Klarna has been one of the big players in that sense. And a lot of you will have probably seen it on some of your e-commerce transactions where you get to your checkout and you'll see something like the logo for Klarna, or in South Africa, I think the big one is Payflex or something along those lines, where you would essentially just tap on a button. They would ask you a bit of information, or they would ask you just to enter your credit card details or something like that, and they'll take the whole transaction from you from that point. So it gives the consumer a way to get access to funding in a short manner, which they wouldn't necessarily, or back in the day, they would have had to have gone into a bank to do that transaction, or to get access to that funding, whereas now it's as easy as essentially just tapping a button. That's a topic on its own, which we can get like really in depth on, but I'll leave it at that. The insurance aspect, a very common aspect of it at the moment is, if you're an insurance provider, and especially in the travel space, is buying plane tickets. A lot of us, or a lot of people luckily enough to travel around, if you're going to other countries, it's generally good practice to have some sort of travel insurance. The last thing you want to do is get stuck there with some medical emergency or something like that, with massive bills to get out of the country or something like that. So what you find is a lot of travel or airlines, when booking tickets with them, they'll just give you a little tick box saying, hey, do you want to get some travel insurance as part of this transaction? And just by ticking that, you've most likely shared your data with a third party, like Chubb in this instance, which I've mentioned here. And essentially you're covered without having to do anything, not having to go to their website and fill out information or anything like that. All of that data is provided to them. And in one transaction, you've essentially managed to book your flights, you've got your insurance, everything is covered from that. And yeah, I mean, the way you can see it as well is Easy Equities also plays in that space with a lot of what we're doing with our partnerships, and allowing the likes of like Discovery Bank and Capitec and everything like that to embed our services in their apps is a form of embedded finance. Are there some things we can do to make the experiences better? Yeah, there always is. But I mean, in terms of the South African landscape and a lot globally, is one of the forerunners when it comes to investments in wealth tech. So one of the big parts of it as well is banking as a service. So like I mentioned, with the advent of APIs and banks getting access to that, is they were able to offer their services to people who weren't a bank, or to applications that wanted to provide banking services within their own applications. And what we ended up seeing was a lot of essentially payment apps and a lot of financial services apps that sometimes, well, a lot of them appear to be banks, but when you actually start like delving into it, the bank that you're actually banking with isn't the bank's name that you're seeing on your bank card or anything like that. So a good example would be something like Revolut and Wise, two massive fintechs in Europe and quite prevalent in Southeast Asia now as well. Is if you look at some of the accounts that you actually have access to, and if you did something basic like just search with the ACH number or the sort code or something like that, you'll actually see like some other bank's name pop up. So the account that you actually have with them isn't like a Revolut account or a Wise account. It's managed by another bank somewhere, which means that them as a business, they don't have to deal with all the overhead and all the capital adequacy and everything like that with being a bank. They can just make good experiences, and you as the consumer can have a better experience that your bank possibly couldn't have given to you due to all of the other things that they had going on. I won't touch on that too much as well. Also something we can get really in depth into, so I'll leave it at that one for there. But where this has really played a big part in is non-financial companies. And something that's actually quite surprising is one of the USA apps isn't a financial company at all. It's actually Starbucks. So Starbucks, I think it was at the end of last year or the year before, they sit on about $1.4 billion of cash that their consumers and their customers have essentially said, great, we're just going to leave this money with you because we want easy access to my, I don't know, double shot macchiato with added cream or something like that in the mornings. And they want to get some rewards points out of it as well. So what they've ended up doing is they've taken just a very basic rewards program where you might see some coffee shops would just give you a little card saying, hey, cool, for every 10th coffee you buy, we're going to give you a free one, where they've completely taken that and built it into an entire customer experience. And you could kind of say that part of Starbucks' business now is them operating as a fintech to a certain extent. And that unlocks many new things for a company as well. There's new revenue streams. Like I mentioned, there's new experiences that they can give to their customers. There's also new access to data that they get out of it as well, which they can build on top of for a customer. And like I mentioned earlier, some of the first things to do with that were store cards. So if you back in the day went and you got your Edgar's card and you went to Edgar's and bought a whole bunch of stuff, they now knew exactly what you were doing because you most likely spent at Edgar's and then also used that card in other transactions as well, like buying food on the way home or paying for your utilities or potentially paying your rent out of it or something like that as well. So as a company, they kind of could build a bit more around you as a consumer with your data. And I know there's been like stories going around with like store cards and everything where some of your big American stores like Walmart and everything like that can actually tell exactly what phase of your life you're in and all sorts of things like that just based off of your transactions with their cards. And yeah, a few other examples there. I mean, one of the easiest ones, or sorry, one of the earliest ones as well would have been the likes of like Uber and just simply taking a credit card and putting that into an app and forgetting about the fact that there's ever a financial transaction that ever took place between you and the service that you're trying to get. So, I mean, without Uber or something like that, you would have to have had cash on hand. You would have had to given it to a cab driver. There was a very definite financial transaction that took place there. But whereas with Uber and the likes of Lyft and everything like that now, you essentially just call something on your app, you get into the car, you get out the car, you never have to worry about cash or arguing with a cab driver, which I don't think is something you get too often in South Africa, but something I've experienced a lot out here with all the cabs I've had to take. And it's just an easier and better experience because of that. Airbnb as well. What they've enabled as well is that seamless payment of going on a vacation and booking your accommodation for it as well. Is no longer would you have to go and like log into your bank account and make like a massive payment for a huge sum of money to someone overseas or something like that, which is also quite a significant transaction to make. And what they've also offered on that too is because they've got access to more data and what's going on with a certain rental and everything like that, they've been able to offer people who are offering their apartments or their houses and everything like that on Airbnb certain kinds of loans and everything like that to kind of see them through to the next rental or to renovate or to upgrade or anything like that. Cool. And then, yeah, some of the things that we'd need to consider going forward. So regulation's a huge part of it for two spaces on it. One is, at the end of the day, no matter what happens with embedded finance, it's people's money that we're operating with. So the regulation needs to look after both the customer, but one of the big parts of regulation that's needed is to kind of ensure that companies are, I wouldn't say forced, but kind of prompted to go down that right road of making their services accessible via APIs, allowing consumers to understand that they do actually have a right to their own data, and their data can be used for what it is that they want to use it for, which has always been something banks have tried to keep like close to them, is they would never like hand out data or being able to access a customer's data from their bank and everything like that was generally quite difficult, even if they gave you the permission to do it. Whereas a lot of the regulation these days is going towards that the consumer should always have access to their data, and if they want to give it to a third party, they should be able to do it. And then that third party should be able to use it for their goods and services and whatever they want to be able to do with it. And then along with that comes all of the things like data privacy. And I mean, you don't want to just dump data on people and not know that they're using it responsibly or anything like that. Trust, again, always using, or we're dealing with people's money again. So we need to make sure that there's always that transparency. People understand like why I'm sharing my data, or why a certain service might need access to financial data or anything like that. Which I think a lot of that has been solved for. And I think one of the big players in that is, or someone who is a big player inconsequentially, is Apple and some of the things that they've been doing. I don't know if any of you have managed to get onto iOS 17, but some of the things that they're doing in terms of saying like, hey, this company actually wants your data to do X, Y, and Z. There is an application actually have to tell them why you need certain data from a user to access your services and everything like that. It's kind of flipping everything on its head to say that the customer is in control now and not the application or the company behind it who was normally the one who was in control. And then one of the last big parts is interoperability. Actually surprised I could say that word. Is essentially how do we make sure that everything can talk to each other? So what we've seen a lot of because of that at the moment is there's an entire industry of what you can call like aggregators, where they'll take all these financial APIs and different services and they'll put them together and build a new layer of APIs on top of it, just to overcome that, to allow other applications to consume those APIs and to make sure that there's that easy communication between the two different parts, whether it's because of a jurisdiction or whether it's just because one side of finance, like investments, doesn't really talk well with banking or something like that in terms of how they store their data and little things. That's one of the big hurdles that still needs to be overcome. Yeah, and I think the big thing on that as well is why a lot of it hasn't really been accelerated when it gets to that point is you look at a lot of the work that was done with getting something as basic like international payments done, and all of those being facilitated through the likes of SWIFT and everything that has to come into that, and making a standardized way of doing those payments. And just seeing like how many years and decades that kind of took to get that right is something we'd need to get a lot of our industry players to kind of do. But one of the great things we've been seeing when it comes to all of that is I wouldn't call them your incumbent like financial institutions, but more of like your network providers. So people like Visa and MasterCard and everything like that, who are very keen to also embrace new technology when it comes to all of those kind of things. I think it was just the other day they also announced, or Visa announced, that they were going to be using Solana's network as part of their treasury operations to essentially allow customers to acquire money in one currency and for the merchant to actually receive it instantly in currency of their choice as well, which, I mean, up until a couple of years ago was unheard of. I can still remember the day when you would swipe your bank card and it was only like 2-3 days later where the money would actually go off your account, and you could easily go into like overdrafts and everything like that. And then for the merchant side, I mean, it would take them a good week or two to actually get access to their money, which as a small business or as a business of any size is something you need to kind of account for. So what does it look like in the future? So I think to kind of go to what Don was saying in his first presentation around AI and some of the things going on there, is that's going to be a massive player when it comes to embedded finance. So a lot of what's happening with embedded finance at the moment is still within like the application space, and a consumer still interacting with services and companies and everything like that through their applications or their websites. But with AI, the next big thing could come along where you could essentially mandate AI to kind of put you on autopilot when it comes, or to be the autopilot for these kind of services within your life. So the way I see it is, I don't think we're too far away from a point where you wake up in the morning and the AI has transferred money into your Starbucks wallet or into your Grab or Uber wallet because it's more beneficial for you to make the transaction out of those for your morning coffee or your morning commute than it is to use your credit card or to do a cash transaction. And whilst you're potentially on the way to work, a new financial savings account or something like that might have been released to the market where it probably suits your financial needs. So why have to go through the hassle of finding that information and trying to understand what it also means for you as a consumer, where you could essentially just get your AI to say, great, I'm going to transfer that portion of my cash in or your cash into this new product. You don't have to worry about anything to do with that as well. And I mean, in this day and age as well, with the whole advent of the gig economy and small businesses, you could also see it in a way of people who generally run those aren't necessarily financial people. They've made a successful business because they've got a good business plan, not because they're great financial people. This could look after a lot of things when it comes to that as well, is being able to sort out their liquidity. Like they're running low on stock and now's a good time to buy stock from this provider or that provider because of a special they're running. It would be able to take care of all of that for you. Or if you've been looking out for a holiday, it can sort that out, book everything for you, get your insurance, get your currency converted, everything like that. And you would just have to sit back and actually just enjoy your holiday and not have to go through the hassle and the ache of having to book all of that. And yeah, that was pretty much just a quick overview of what embedded finance is. So any questions? If not, that's the end.
I have a question. Awesome presentation, Lucas.
Go for it, Don.
All right, so my question is, what are you most excited about in terms of the mechanisms of embedded finance that we are currently doing? And what are you most excited about versus what we are not doing, what we could be doing? So in other words, what are we doing in group that you're most excited about, and outside of group, what are you most excited about in embedded finance?
So inside the group, I think the payments part is a really big aspect. I mean, I think something we kind of undermine a little bit is the fact that we allow one of South Africa's biggest bank, being Discovery Bank, to instantly transfer money to us. I mean, Discovery Bank doesn't have business bank accounts. We don't have any kind of we don't have a big relationship when it comes to that in that sense, and we allow for that instantaneously between two different entities, essentially. Another big part of that is the same thing that we managed to get right with our integration that's coming up with Gcash, is we've taken that whole model and been able to also do it with an element of foreign currency that needs to be exchanged as well, where you can essentially take your pesos, transfer it to Easy Equities from your Gcash app, and you've instantly got US dollars now to invest in the US market. And I think if you actually look at what that entails and what it means to actually get that right, especially when we're still in a day and age where if you wanted to make an international payment, you're going to have to log into your bank app, especially in South Africa, where we've got very strict foreign currency exchange control, is you would have to log into your bank. You would have to fill out all kinds of information as to why you're paying this money, where it's going to, who's the recipient, what BOP code does this apply to, which I mean, most people don't even know what BOP stands for when it comes to that. And we've just instantly made that happen without having to be concerned about anything when it comes to that. And then I think a big part is what you're also doing when it comes to the whole Easy Pay side, is allowing us to integrate with other services seamlessly, which I think is a big part of what Easy Equities can do as a platform. And I think it's our big selling point as well when it comes to our partners. There's a lot of companies out there that do similar things to us now when it comes to fractional investing and everything like that, but no one's really built a platform that you could kind of say is plug and play when it comes to getting all these new services into them, or being able to consume new services quite easily like we're doing. Outside of the group, for me, I would say the thing I'm looking forward to most is also the whole payment side. I think especially since I moved out of South Africa was getting access to money that I had in South Africa and being able to spend that abroad, and yeah, just kind of getting that quick, easy access that you normally need was something that was quite eye-opening. And using non-banking methods of doing it has sped up that transaction time like tenfold. I mean, if I went to my bank and wanted to transfer money here to the Philippines, it's a transaction that would most likely take 3 to 4 days and would have like massive fees involved as well. I think the first time I actually did it as a Swift payment, it cost me like $750 to get right. Whereas using the likes of your more fintech focused companies that are kind of playing in that space, you can get that whole transaction time down into like 10, 15 minutes, which is crazy when you think about it, being able to send money from one country to another country. But at the same time, not crazy in the sense that, I mean, we can send massive amounts of data and information over the internet seamlessly, but we can't do it with money. So to kind of get it to, pardon?
You can with
well,
crypto.
Yeah, you can with crypto. You can with crypto. I was waiting for you to say that. But yeah, I mean, it's the big thing with that though is the access to it as well. I mean, cool, I can get my money into crypto. I would still have to go from a fiat currency into crypto and then crypto into a fiat currency because not everywhere accepts crypto and everything like that yet. Which is what I'm actually really excited for when it comes to likes with Visa doing what they just announced the other day with using Solana's network and all of that to kind of handle their treasury, is being able to speed up those kind of little processes where, yeah, in my mind, it makes no sense that you can, like I said, send hundreds of gigabytes worth of data like to other countries as quickly as you can in this day and age, but you can't easily send money. Just makes absolutely no sense, because when it boils down to it, it's all just a bit of data essentially in a database somewhere. So the fact that you can do it with a video, or you can stream a video from wherever around the world and not do it with your money, makes no sense in my mind. So very looking forward to a day when I can instantly just have my money in South Africa or have my money here in the Philippines and not have to worry about sending it somewhere else.
Oh, yeah. Lucas, my question was with regards to API. It's a bit technical, but in the analogy you gave, right? So, for example, when we say our API communicates with Discovery's API, what is that? Two waiters discussing in the kitchen and then bringing back what you've asked? Like, how does that fit into the analogy?
Yeah, sure. So if we did it that way, that would be, I mean, the way you could say it would be you would sitting in a dining hall, say it's that Phantom City or something like that, and they had some waiters walking around, and you've got a waiter coming from KFC saying, hey, what do you want? And you've got a waiter coming from McDonald's, if they existed in this world, coming to you and saying, hey, what do you want as well? So two different companies with two different waiters, you can kind of say it, but the experience would still be that person in the middle who was trying to achieve a certain goal. So yeah, it goes from each side. So essentially Easy Equities has its own kitchen and its own set of APIs and waiters which people can consume, and then so would a bank like Discovery Bank and other service providers and everything like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just an easy way for applications to communicate with each other. It's pretty much like I said with the analogy, like if you ordered something on a menu, what you read on the menu is generally what you would expect to receive. And the same thing is true with an API. If you called a specific API to say you wanted Don's information of his last 10 transactions, that's pretty much what you would expect to get back. You're not going to get like a whole list of random information about Don, about like what he had for dinner last night and everything like that. You're just going to get those 10 transactions.
Okay, makes sense.
All right. Any other questions?
Cool.
No, just a comment. Maybe it was quite informative. Thanks, Lucas. And it took us on quite a journey, and not all of it good memories because it reminded me of standing in queues in the bank and wanting to deposit money, having to fill in a slip. So we've come very far. Yeah, and it's very nice to, yeah, it was a very nice session. Thank you very much. Very informative. Well done.
Thank you. Appreciate it.